Her voice sliced through the room before the soup even touched the table. "Get this pauper away, before she embarrasses us all." And just like that, the silverware froze, the laughter died, and I became invisible. My son didn't speak. He looked down at his plate like it had answers. And I sat still, not because I didn't feel the sting, but because I already knew. I already knew who signed the checks for the caterers. I already knew who paid the mortgage on the house she bragged about. And by morning, she would know too. "You're still here, and I know why. Maybe it wasn't a dinner party. Maybe no one said the word pauper. But someone, somewhere, made you feel like you didn't belong. Like your presence ruined their perfect picture. Like your years of giving counted for nothing the moment they had an audience to impress. Maybe it was your daughter. Maybe your brother. Maybe someone you once raised like your own. Someone who smiled in public but rolled their eyes when you spoke. Someone who forgot who kept the lights on, who sewed the seams, who stayed up folding clothes while everyone else slept. Maybe they said you were too loud, too needy, too old. Maybe they sighed when you entered the room. Maybe they planned a party and hoped you wouldn't come. Or worse, they invited you, just to make you feel small. If that's you, this porch light stays on for you. I want to thank you for being here, not just for watching, but for surviving the kind of silence that echoes louder than words. For choosing to keep showing up, even when they pretended you didn't matter. And if you're watching this from a quiet bedroom or a worn-out couch or sitting in your car outside a house that once felt like home, know this: you are not forgotten. You're part of this table. You always have been. Tell me your story. Write down there in the comments, or send it to the email below. I read every single one. Tell me, who tried to write you out of your own story? Who told you that you were too much, when you were really just too real for them? We've got more to talk about. Because before that mop ever touched her hand, there were years of being looked through. Years of carrying more than they ever noticed. Let me tell you how we got there. They saw an old woman sitting quietly at the edge of a long table. But what they never saw, what they chose not to see, was the road I took just to earn that seat. I didn't always look like this. Wrinkles don't come from time alone. They come from worry, from holding things together with tired hands, from biting your tongue when all you wanted was to scream, "I'm doing my best." I started with one oven, not a fancy industrial one. A regular stove in a too-small kitchen, with burners that only worked if you lit them with a match. I had one account, just one. A small local church that needed sandwiches and lemonade every other Sunday. I made the bread by hand and squeezed the lemons myself. My son was still a toddler, napping in a laundry basket beside the sink while I worked. I delivered those orders in a rusted-out van, the kind that rattled every time you hit a pothole. I remember praying it wouldn't break down in the middle of a delivery. Sometimes I'd park 2 blocks away just so no one would see what I drove. But they always got their food on time. Always hot, always fresh. I didn't sleep much. I didn't shop for myself. I didn't take vacations. I took orders. I took phone calls. I took chances. And I built it. One order turned into 5. 5 into 50. By the time my boy was in high school, I had a full staff, a rented kitchen space, and contracts with half the schools and offices in our district. I was tired, but I was proud. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I knew I had built something solid, something honest, something that put food on other people's tables too. They think I left all that behind. But stepping back isn't the same as walking away. 5 years ago, I handed over the daily tasks to a team I trained myself. I still sit on the board, I still sign the checks, I still see the numbers. But I wanted to rest, to travel a bit, to sit in silence and listen to birds instead of burners. I didn't need a crown, I needed peace. But sometimes, peace walks you right into battle. Especially when the people eating off your name forget who stocked the pantry. That night at the dinner, they looked at me and saw old. They saw simple. They saw disposable. But they didn't see the woman who stayed up through flu season just to prep casseroles for someone else's wedding. They didn't see the woman who picked up the slack when others called out sick, who kept payroll going when storms shut down the city. No, they didn't see that woman. They saw a grandmother in her Sunday best. Quiet, polite, sitting too close to their ambition. So they dismissed me. Not with words at first, with looks, with body language, with empty chairs, and untouched place settings, until Rachel said it out loud, said what they all had been thinking. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than I expected. It's not that they didn't know what I built. It's that they didn't care. They cared more about how I looked than what I built. More about image than legacy. And that was the moment I stopped hoping for an apology and started planning something else. Because you can only ignore a woman like me for so long, until the walls she built start talking back. The invitation came in a gold-trimmed envelope with wax seals and cursive letters like it was royalty calling me to court. My son had said it kindly, like he meant it. "Come, Ma, you deserve to be celebrated." And for a second, I believed him. I really did. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was their way of saying thank you. Maybe the years hadn't gone unnoticed. Maybe the quiet hands that carried this family were finally going to be welcomed into the light. So I pressed my hair the old way, dusted off a navy dress I hadn't worn since church reopened after the pandemic. Pearls, not the real kind, but the ones that catch light just enough to make you feel held together. I wore my Sunday shoes, the ones with the gentle heel and memory foam insoles. Nothing loud, nothing grand, just me, clean, ready, and hopeful. But the moment I stepped into that ballroom, I knew. It was in the air, thick with perfume and tension, the kind of air that makes you aware of your breath. The tables were long and wrapped in velvet, napkins folded into swans. Waiters moved like shadows, placing tiny name cards beside gleaming wine glasses. There were floral centerpieces so tall you had to tilt your head to see who was sitting across from you. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a spectacle, a display of new money trying to forget old roots. And I wasn't a guest. I was a reminder. A reminder of food stamps, of shared bedrooms, of the dented lunchbox my son once carried. A living, breathing piece of the past they were all trying to decorate over. I walked to the table they said was mine, tucked in the far corner, away from the photos and the speeches. It had no centerpiece, no folded napkin swan, no place card with my name. My seat was bare. Someone had set a bread plate and a fork, but not a full setting. The waiter approached me, hesitating like he wasn't sure I was supposed to be there at all. I smiled at him, told him it was all right, because even though the air was heavy and the lights too bright, I still believed, somewhere in me, that maybe it was just a mistake. I looked around the room and saw her, Rachel, laughing in a dress I'm sure cost more than my first car, her lips red as cherries, her heels too high to walk in with grace. She didn't see me, or she did, and chose not to. That was the difference. And my son? He was at her side, smiling tight, the kind of smile you wear when you're trying to hold something together that's already slipping. He didn't wave, didn't come greet me, didn't even nod. He just looked through me. And the room, with all its glitter and silk, felt colder than a snowstorm, not because the temperature dropped, but because sometimes the coldest places are filled with people who used to know your name. I sat down quietly, folded my hands, looked at the menu I couldn't read without my glasses. The clinking of forks and chatter of forced laughter filled the air. But I didn't taste anything. I didn't touch the water, because deep down I could already feel it coming. A moment was building. Not from drama, but from distance. From the way they avoided eye contact, from the way the server kept skipping my side of the table. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning dressed in formal wear. And I was about to be reminded just how far they were willing to go to pretend they got here without me. I was still sitting there when the appetizers began to arrive. Tiny portions on wide white plates. A drizzle of something green. A leaf shaped like a question mark. Everyone oohed and ahed as the waiters placed each plate down like they were holding glass. But none came my way. I waited. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I thought maybe it was just a delay. But then I saw it. The look passed between the waiter and Rachel. Just a flick of the eyes. Just enough. Rachel turned. Looked straight at me. Tilted her head like she was confused, like I had wandered into the wrong room. And then, like she was doing everyone a favor, she raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said to the waiter, loud enough for the table to hear. "Who let her sit here?" The table went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a spotlight. Every head turned slightly, pretending not to look. I felt my fingers tighten around the cloth napkin on my lap. The waiter froze. He looked at me, then back at her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is her assigned seat." Rachel didn't let him finish. "No, this isn't happening. I told you we had limited seating. This is a formal evening, not a soup kitchen." Then she laughed, like it was funny. And then, the line that will echo longer than most people's applause. "Get this pauper away from the table before she embarrasses us all." I didn't flinch, not outwardly, but inside, something cracked. Not because of her words, but because of the silence that followed them. My son, my only child, didn't say a word. He didn't stand, didn't defend me, didn't even look at me. He sipped his drink like he didn't hear a thing. One cousin covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Another looked away completely. Someone started whispering. I couldn't tell who. And I sat there, not because I was stunned, but because I had nothing left to give that table. I had given them food, gave them jobs, gave them babysitting on short notice, gas money when they were in between, prayers, calls, quilts for cold nights, silence when they needed someone to just listen. And they gave me a new title, Pauper. The word didn't even sting as much as the ease with which she said it. As if I had never been anything else. As if every year of my work and sacrifice had disappeared the moment I didn't look expensive enough for her guest list. That was the moment I realized, some betrayals aren't loud. Some of them don't throw punches or slam doors. They don't cuss you out or break things. Some betrayals just sit still, quietly, at your own son's side, while someone else tosses you out. And that silence, it cuts deeper than any insult ever could, because it tells you something you can't unhear. They knew, they heard, they saw, and they chose to let it happen anyway. I didn't respond, not with a word, not with a glare, not even with a sigh. There's something that happens when you've been humiliated enough times in life. You learn the difference between what's worth answering and what's best left to echo in the empty spaces where respect should have been. So I sat there for a moment longer, let the room keep breathing like I wasn't there. Let the people I once fed lean into their laughter. Let my son pretend he had something more important to study on the rim of his wine glass. Then I picked up my purse. It was the same black purse I carried to church. Nothing fancy, just big enough to hold tissues, peppermints, and my small, silent strength. I stood slowly. I didn't stumble. I didn't rush. I didn't adjust my dress or smooth my hair. Because I wasn't the one who needed straightening. I turned to the waiter, the young man who had looked so unsure earlier. I gave him a nod, a small smile. He didn't smile back, but I saw it in his eyes. He knew. And sometimes, that's enough. I walked past the flower arrangements, past the photo display they had made of family memories, none of which included me. Past the speeches printed on thick paper. Past the people who whispered and looked at me like I was a stain on their evening. No one stood, no one followed, and I didn't look back. Because sometimes, dignity is the only suitcase you need, and mine was packed full. Every quiet night I spent working while they slept, every phone bill I covered, every meal I made, every time I bit my tongue so they could keep their peace. Every late night prayer when I didn't know how I'd keep the lights on, but refused to let them go cold. I carried all of that out the door with me, not as baggage, but as proof. Proof that I didn't have to raise my voice to raise my worth. I walked into the cold night air, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed easy. The stars looked down at me, and I smiled because they were the only things in that city that hadn't changed. I got into my car, yes, the one they called outdated behind my back, and I drove home with the radio off. Not because I was angry, not because I was broken, but because silence, after that kind of betrayal, feels like balm. And by the time I reached my porch, I already knew what I was going to do next. Not tomorrow, not next week, the next morning. Because while they laughed at my dress, they forgot I still signed checks. And while they called me a pauper, they didn't realize the building they were standing in, the one with the fancy napkins and the crystal chandeliers, was mine. They thought they could uninvite me from a table I paid for. So the next day, I decided to show them who was really serving whom. By the time I unlocked my front door, the cold had left my skin, but not my bones. I hung up my coat, changed into my nightgown, and brewed a cup of tea. Chamomile. No sugar. The house was still. Not the kind of silence that follows loneliness, but the kind that waits with you while you decide whether you'll stay broken or build again. I sat in my kitchen, the same one where I used to bake bread for church fundraisers, where I folded invoices beside flour. The counters were clean, the kettle still warm, and beside me, my phone. I stared at it for a moment, not out of hesitation, but clarity. There are moments in life when you realize the power you've been sitting on, not because you want to use it, but because you're tired of people thinking you don't have any. I dialed the number I knew by heart. Not a hotline, not a lawyer, just a quiet extension to a department that still respected the name printed on the company's founding papers. Human Resources, the voice said on the other end. It was polite, but neutral. The kind of tone that expects trouble but stays ready. "This is Margaret Hayes," I said, steady and clear. "I'd like you to pull Rachel Maxwell's employee file." There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am, of course. And I want you to place her on internal transfer." I continued, effective immediately. Another pause, shorter this time. They were catching on. "Understood. You want her moved to which department?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let even a drop of anger show, just one small smile in my voice. "Let's see how she does in food services. Rotating kitchen duties, starting with dishwashing." A beat of silence. "Yes, ma'am. That can be arranged." "I'll sign whatever's needed," I said. "But don't inform her it was from me. Let her find out the same way I found out I wasn't welcome at my own table," quietly. "Yes, Chairwoman," that title. Chairwoman. They hadn't said it in months, not because I lost it, but because I stepped aside, gave others the spotlight. But the truth is, I never left the room. I just turned my chair toward the window to rest. And now I was turning back around. I hung up the phone, took a slow sip of tea. She had no idea, not a clue. All the events she bragged about planning, all the catering deals she oversaw, the client presentations she hosted to impress leadership. She'd been working under me the entire time. My name was on the boardroom wall, on the contracts, on the foundation. She just never looked up long enough to see it. And now she'd be working under fluorescent lights, in the kitchen, elbow deep in soap and rinse trays, wearing shoes that pinch and an apron that smells like bleach and steam. Because if you can't treat people with respect at the table, then maybe it's time you learn what it means to clean one. Morning came like any other. Rachel woke in silk sheets, under a roof built by someone else's sweat. She slipped into her heels like she always did, the ones she called her power shoes. Poured herself oat milk into an etched glass she didn't pay for. She got dressed slow, sure of her day, rehearsing compliments she'd fish for at work, about her outfit, her confidence, her command of the room. She had no idea what waited for her. She walked into the building with her usual sway, waving to reception like a celebrity who forgot who installed the lights. Marched straight to the elevators, pulled out her key card, and tapped the sensor. Nothing. It blinked red. She tried again. Tap. Red again. The security guard looked up from his desk. "Problem with your badge?" Rachel smiled, that tight smile of someone used to being obeyed. "Probably just a glitch. I'll call IT." He stood. "No need. Your supervisor's on the way down." Now she was frowning. Why would, ding. Elevator doors opened. Her floor manager, Gerald, stepped out. He wasn't smiling. "Rachel? Come with me." They didn't go up. They walked across the lobby, through a back hallway she never noticed before. No polished floors, no decorative plants, just a hallway that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something baked too long. They entered a small office. On the desk sat a folded apron, a mop, and a clipboard with new schedule sheets. "What is this?" Rachel asked, half laughing. "Is this a prank?" Gerald didn't flinch. "Effective immediately," he said. "You've been reassigned to internal rotation. Food services, Monday through Friday. Morning prep, dish station, and floor sanitation." Her mouth fell open. "This isn't funny." He picked up the clipboard. "Not meant to be. You'll report to Miss Jeanette in the lower kitchen. Orientation starts in 10. No, this has to be a mistake. I'm in events. I'm corporate. He cut her off. "This is by order of the chairwoman." Rachel froze. "What chairwoman?" she asked, confused. "There hasn't been a chairwoman on site since." He leaned in, voice low but clear. "Margaret Hayes." Rachel's face drained of color. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Gerald continued, matter of fact. "The founder, owner, and yes, your mother-in-law." She stood still for a moment, stunned. As if the building she was in suddenly didn't make sense. As if the walls had been keeping secrets. Her name badge had already been removed, her computer login wiped, her office reassigned. Everything was already done. Because when you sit at someone's table and call them a pauper, you forget the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't flinch when insulted. Rachel looked down at the apron. Folded neatly, a single white tag stitched inside the collar like all employee uniforms had. Property of Hayes Catering Co. And now, so was she. The news spread fast, quieter than gossip, but louder than truth. The kind of news that doesn't need to be printed or posted, it just moves, from break room to boardroom, from whispered hallway glances to late-night texts between staff who suddenly realized they hadn't really known who was in charge all along. Rachel didn't show up the next day, or the one after. Called in sick. Truth was, she couldn't stand the thought of scrubbing the same dishes she once sneered over at galas. Couldn't bear the idea of being seen, not at the head table but behind the steam. But actions have echoes, and silence when you've crossed the line can be the loudest sound in the world. Then came the flowers, a big, overdone arrangement. White lilies, pink roses, orchids. I know she didn't pick out herself. Delivered to my front porch with a little card that read, "So sorry for the misunderstanding. Hoping we can talk soon. Love, Rachel." I didn't respond. The next morning, I got a voicemail. Her voice soft, almost trembling. "Hi, ma'am. Mom. I just wanted to say I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I really do appreciate everything you've done for the family. I was under a lot of stress that night. It wasn't personal." It wasn't personal. That's what they always say when they want to clean up a mess without touching it. Another message came the day after. This time she said, "Please, can we talk? I miss having you around. The kids do too. You've always been such a strong presence in this family. You're the heart of it, really." Funny how when people feel your silence, they start remembering your presence. The week after that, she showed up in person. I saw her car pull up. I didn't answer the door. She stood on the porch for a few minutes, flowers in one hand, sunglasses on, even though the day was overcast. Eventually she left. But this time the card simply said, "I'm sorry, Ma. Truly." And there it was. She started calling me Ma that day. Not because her heart changed. Not because she suddenly remembered the way I rocked her babies or sent groceries when her fridge was empty. Not because she finally saw me as family. She started calling me Ma. Because now she knew who signed her time card. Because now she had to. It's funny, isn't it? How quickly respect finds its way into someone's mouth after power reminds them who built the floor they're standing on. But me? I wasn't interested in being called Ma, like it was a password to forgiveness. I didn't need her flowers. I didn't need her voicemail apologies. I didn't even need her tears. Because there's a kind of peace that comes when you stop waiting for the people who hurt you to admit what they did. You don't always need revenge. Sometimes, you just need clarity. And a quiet seat on your own porch, watching them try to figure out how the story flipped without them realizing they weren't holding the pen. A few days after Rachel left the flowers and walked off my porch, I heard another car pull up. But this time, it wasn't hers. It was my son. I watched from behind the curtain as he stepped out of the driver's side, hesitating at the bottom step like he wasn't sure if he should knock or turn around. Like maybe the house felt different now, even though the porch swing still creaked the same and the scent of lemon polish still lingered near the windows. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time, but because shame adds years when it finally shows up. He knocked, softly, just twice. I opened the door, didn't say a word. Just held it there, open. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. He stepped in slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. And maybe, in that moment, he wasn't. We sat in the living room, him on the edge of the couch, me in my usual chair by the window. The silence between us stretched, long and quiet. He cleared his throat once, twice, then he finally said it. "Ma, why didn't you tell me?" I didn't look at him right away. "Tell you what?" He rubbed his hands together. "That you were still running things, that you're the chairwoman. That, all of it. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at him then. My boy, my baby. The same child I used to carry through thunderstorms, the same boy who used to draw me pictures with crooked hearts and call me his hero. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need your praise, I said. I needed your presence. He blinked, sat still for a moment, then his eyes watered. He shook his head and let out a breath he must have been holding all week. I failed you, Ma. I looked at him, not with anger, but something deeper. That ache only mothers understand. No, I said, soft but certain, you forgot me. And that, I added, is worse. His face broke. Tears came, not loud but full. The kind that come when pride finally steps aside and regret walks in. He covered his mouth with his hand and lowered his head. I thought I was doing right, he whispered. Working hard, building something. I didn't even realize. That you were standing on my shoulders? I finished for him. He nodded. We sat in that stillness for a while. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't live in the words. Sometimes it lives in the space where the pain finally gets seen. He looked up at me, eyes red. I don't deserve your grace. And I said, no, you don't, but neither did I deserve your silence. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. But I didn't squeeze back, not yet. Because wounds like that don't close overnight. And just because a man cries doesn't mean a mother forgets the years she went unnoticed. Some of you watching this might say he tried, he came back, he cried, that should be enough. But others, you know what it means to be looked through for years only to be seen once your silence grows teeth. I loved my son. Still do. But love doesn't erase the ache of being forgotten while standing in the same room. That meal didn't feed me. It didn't nourish my body or warm my spirit. It didn't fill my plate or hold my name, but in some strange, twisted way, it freed me. It was the last time I showed up hoping to be seen. The last time I bent myself into something softer so others could feel tall. The last time I walked into a room trying to prove I belonged in it. Because now I know. I never needed a chair at that table. I built the table, the floor beneath it, the ceiling above it, the company that paid for the venue, the staff, the wine, the cloth napkins folded like swans. All of it. And I was done shrinking just to make space for people who'd forgotten whose hands carved the wood. A week after it all happened, I returned to my company's kitchen. Not through the front entrance, not in heels and pearls. Just me, in flats and a sweater, no announcement. The real way power moves when it doesn't need to prove itself. I walked past the polished conference rooms, past the hallway lined with photos of executive success stories, many of which I helped finance, and took the elevator down, to the basement, the kitchen floor, where the real work happens. It smelled of bleach and bread, of burnt cheese and disinfectant. Pots clanged, shoes squeaked, music played low from someone's phone near the dish station. And when I walked in, heads turned. Not with judgment, but with recognition. They knew me, not as the chairwoman, not as the boss, but as her. The woman who remembered birthdays, who showed up early for weddings, who once pulled a single mother off mop duty because she had a job interview after her shift. I sat on an overturned crate right beside the dishwasher crew. Not because I was above them, but because I had been them. We talked, laughed, ate leftover cornbread and drank sweet tea from styrofoam cups. No speeches. No titles, just steam and stories. One of them said, "We heard what happened. We would have never let them talk to you like that down here." And I smiled, because that was the truth. They didn't see me as a pauper. They saw me as a woman who fed generations. A woman who never forgot how to roll up her sleeves. A woman who knew the weight of a mop handle and the rhythm of a prep line. A woman who paid her dues, not with pride, but with presence. That day, I didn't reclaim anything, because nothing had ever been taken. I simply remembered what they tried to make me forget. My value isn't up for vote. It doesn't need their validation or their invitations. And now, I don't try anymore. I don't explain my worth, chase down apologies, or show up where love has to be earned. Because when you've poured your life into building a home, a business, a legacy, and they still act like you're lucky to be near them, it's time to stop knocking on doors you paid to build. That meal broke me. But it also blessed me. Because it taught me something no title or salary ever could. Your worth doesn't live in who claps for you. It lives in who remembers you. When the spotlight fades and the plates are empty. I'm back on my porch now. Same wooden swing, same hummingbird feeder hanging from the rafter, same chipped paint on the rail where my grandson once carved his name with a spoon. Nothing extravagant. but everything real. I sit out here most evenings, wrapped in a light shawl with a cup of mint tea, just watching the light change. Sometimes the neighbor waves. Sometimes the breeze carries a memory. The smell of bread baking or the faint whistle of my late husband calling the kids in for supper. And I think about tables. The ones I've set. The ones I've been invited to. And the ones where I brought the food, paid the bill, cleaned up after everyone, only to be treated like a ghost when it was time to pass the mic. I've sat at plastic folding tables and felt like royalty. And I've sat at long, linen-covered ones surrounded by gold forks and empty hearts, and felt invisible. That's the truth no one likes to say out loud. It's not about the table. It's about how they treat you when you sit down. And I've learned, some chairs don't fit anymore, especially the ones they saved for you in pity. The chairs where they only pull it out because it looks good to have you there. The ones where your silence is more welcome than your story. The ones where you're tolerated, not treasured. I used to think I had to fight for a seat. That I had to stay, even when it hurt, just to prove that I still mattered. But I've lived long enough to know better now. Sometimes, walking away from a table isn't about bitterness, it's about rebirth. It's about choosing peace over performance, dignity over decorum, truth over tradition. Because there's something powerful about knowing you can sit alone and still feel full. And if they only loved you when they thought you had nothing, they never really loved you. They loved your silence, your compliance, your absence. But I'm not in the business of shrinking anymore. Not for my son. Not for Rachel. Not for people who think age is something to decorate the background. Not honor at the center. Respect isn't owed just because you're old. It's earned again, when you remind them why they came to eat in the first place. I didn't raise a family just to become their afterthought. I didn't build a business just to be excluded from the party I paid for. And I certainly didn't survive storms just to be told to wait outside while they dance under the roof I built. So now I sit on my porch, not in waiting, but in peace. Because some chairs, some rooms, some relationships, they just don't fit anymore. And the most beautiful thing I ever did was stop trying to squeeze myself into places that had already decided to close the door on me. To the women watching this, I want to say something just to you. If they ever made you feel like noise in your own home, if they rolled their eyes when you spoke, sighed when you entered, or turned their back when all you asked for was a moment of acknowledgement, if your silence was the only thing they ever thanked you for, then hear me clearly. You were never too much. You were never too loud. You were never in the way. You were simply too real for their table. Too honest for their lies. Too steady for their chaos. Too seasoned for their shallow celebrations. And that made them uncomfortable. They didn't reject you because you lacked value. They rejected you because your very presence reminded them of what they hadn't earned, of what they took for granted, of the legacy they inherited without understanding the cost. To the women who cooked every meal, remembered every birthday, carried burdens in silence, and still got treated like a guest in your own family. This story is yours. To the women who worked behind the scenes, only to be told you never contributed, this porch light is for you. You don't need to go back and make them see you. You don't need to argue or perform or shrink. Because the truth is, if they didn't see you the first 1,000 times you showed up with open hands, they were never looking for your heart. Only your service. But now is the time to sit in your own power. To reclaim the name they whispered like it was an inconvenience. To stand in the place they tried to edge you out of. To live not for their acceptance, but for your own peace. You're not forgotten. You're not invisible. And you are not alone. Because I see you. I see you holding it together for everyone. Only to be told you're dramatic when you finally break. I see you giving your last warmth to people who called you cold. I see you staying quiet, not because you didn't have anything to say, but because you were measuring the cost of your words. And sometimes, silence was the stronger choice. But not tonight. Tonight, you get to say your name. You get to own your story. You get to take your seat, not at their table, but at the one you built with your bare hands. And if they won't pull up a chair beside you, that's all right. Because the strongest women I know have learned how to feast alone and still give thanks. So if this story touched something in you, if it felt familiar in the deepest part of your chest, I want you to do something. Comment below if someone ever forgot what you built and expected you to be grateful for the scraps. Subscribe if you've ever left in silence, not in bitterness, but because you finally knew what your piece was worth. And if you ever wonder whether anyone sees you, look right here. Because this porch light, it stays on for women like us.